So what I want to talk about today is taking a look at this excerpt, figuring out how to analyze it, and after we've done that, taking out the non-chord tones and rewriting it as a simplified version. So, step one is always to determine what key you're in. One sharp is either G major or E minor. Looking at where it starts, B, D, G, D, that looks like a G major triad. G, B, D, G, that looks like a G major triad as well. Okay, probably we're in G major, we're probably not in E minor. If we were in E minor, I would also expect a raised leading tone. The leading tone in E would be a D. I see no D sharps, so I'm confident I can write an uppercase G colon underneath the key signature. That first chord, as we just said, we have a B, D, G, and another D. G would be the root of that chord, G, B, D. In the key of G, that would be a 1 chord. It's in first inversion, so I put the 6 to indicate first inversion triad. So it is a 1-6 chord. I then see that there's this F sharp. Well, that's not part of a 1-6 chord, so I'm going to circle it. That'll be a non-chord tone. I'm not going to analyze it right now. I'm going to wait until I analyze. Well, there's two ways you can do it. One is you can say, okay, I'm going to analyze it right now before I do the chord I'm going to. If I were to do that, I would say it's prepared by step, resolved by step in the same direction. If we look at our chart from before, that would be a passing tone. So I'm pretty confident it's a passing tone. The only reasons it might be funny is if there's something unusual happens here. But that's pretty unlikely. So I can simply label that passing tone. So I put a P right down there. And actually I think what I'll do is I'll analyze these in a different color so that it sticks out a little bit more. So let me do that. I'll circle it. So that F sharp is a passing tone. I'll then move on to my next chord. I write down my pitches. C, D, E, E. Well, that doesn't make a triad. So I look forward and say, well, what comes later on in that beat? Harmonic rhythm right now has been established as the quarter note. Probably going to be the quarter note for the whole piece, maybe not. Usually once you've established a harmonic rhythm, it can be twice as long or twice as short as your average. So quarter note's what we expect. Maybe we'll get a half note, maybe we'll get an eighth note, harmonic rhythm. But if we look and say, okay, well, what if we go with this next note? 2 C's, 2 E's. C, C, E, E. Well, that doesn't make up a triad either. But at least it's just a third. That we can make more sense of. We could say, well, C, E, it could be C, E, G, and we're leaving out the fifth. The fifth is commonly omitted. So that seems to make a lot of sense. You could say, well, couldn't it be a 2 chord and you're missing the A? Well, if you're missing the A, you're missing the root. You can't say it's the chord that's missing the root. Missing the fifth, that's common. Missing the root, not so much. So this would probably be a 4 chord. C major in the key of G would be a 4 chord. And 1, 6 to 4 would make a lot of sense harmonically. 4 chords are commonly used. And if we do that, then we have to say, well, that D, well, we can even see that it's tied over. The non-chord tone that's prepared by common tone, often with a tie and then resolved down by step, that is our suspension. And that's exactly what we have. So you label it with the S. we then want to label what kind of suspension that is. If we go over here, label suspensions. How do you get the numbers? Well, you do the interval from the bass to the note, that is the suspension. You determine what number that is. So in this case, C to D. We never go C, D, we never do 2. We always use the compound, so C, D, E, F, G, A, B, C, D, 9. So that number would be 9 in this case. And then you do bass note, to the resolution note. The resolution note is in the same voice, just moved over rhythmically. But it's over that same bass. So C to C, bass to the resolution note, is an 8. So you would call this a 9/8 suspension. But just pay attention to that process on how do you label suspensions. From the bass to the suspended note, then that same bass note to the resolution note, and you're getting those numbers. Now, you don't need to worry about compound intervals for things like 6 to 5 or 4 to 3 or any of those other numbers. There you're not going to be writing things like 11, 12. Okay? This is the only one where you want it to be a compound interval. The only other situation that you're going to be required to label a suspension is where the suspension is in the bass voice. In which case you can't say, I'm going to go from the bass to the suspension note, if the suspension note is in the bass. But we've talked about this in a previous lesson. And there what you're doing is you're going suspension note in the bass to the most dissonant note above. And then note the resolution tone in the bass to that same dissonant note, which is part of the chord. So that's how you would, when the suspension is in the bass, how you would handle that. All right, so we have our 4 chord, omitting the 5th. It's not a tripled root and a third, which would be our most expected thing when we omit the 5th. It's a doubled root and a doubled third. Doubling is the first thing that can go in terms of our rules. Not for you writing. Right now I'd say stick with the exact rules. But in terms of analysis. Let's move on to our next chord. We have a D, C, F, and F sharp, and a D. Well, the root would be D, because that's where we can stack thirds. D. Well, look, this doesn't make a triad. It almost makes a 7th chord, right? It almost makes D, F sharp, A, C. And we just talked about right here how the 5th can be left out, and that's common. Well, if we leave the 5th out here as well, it would be D, F sharp, A, C. D, F sharp, A, C, is that something that do we expect that type of 7th chord in the key of G major? Yeah, 5-7 is very, very common. So our expectations will help us with that analysis. So there's 2 things we've encountered that have been a challenge, or present a little bit of an issue. Doubling. So it's not 2 things really, it's really just one. When we have an unusual doubling that results in omitting a chord tone. That could throw you off when you're doing an analysis. You might not immediately say, oh look, it's the 5th missing. So that's what I want you to have as a backup. When you're looking at a set of chords and you say, it doesn't create a triad, it doesn't create a 7th chord, ask yourself, well, if the 5th is missing, could I then make this up? And you could say, well, C, D, well that's definitely not, the C can't be the root of anything. It's like C, E, G, there's no E, there's no G, there's too much missing. F sharp, A, C, well A would be the third, D, F sharp, so if you just pick each note and say, well what would be stacking thirds on that note? D, F sharp, A would be the fifth, we can omit the fifth, C, there we go, we got it. So when you get a collection of notes like this, look at each pitch, decide what would be stacking thirds, and when you get to the fifth, feel comfortable to say, oh, it's missing, I'm not worried. If the third's missing, you should worry. You're probably wrong, that's not the root of the chord. So keep that at the forefront of your mind as you're doing an analysis. Finding where the root is, seeing what's above. If the fifth is missing, don't sweat it. See if you just try to keep going and see if it makes sense. And then look at harmonic progression, 1, 4, 5, 7. Well, that makes a ton of sense. So you know you're on the right track. You then have a B right here. Okay? So you have the B. The B's not part of the chord. So we circle, and then we say, okay, it's prepared by step and resolved by common tone. If we look at our chart of non-chord tones, which non-chord tone is prepared by step and resolved by common tone? Well, none exactly. The closest one would be the anticipation, where we said it could be prepared by step or leap and resolved by common tone. Well, this is step, so that's fine. We're anticipating. So, anticipation on the B. Let's move forward. We have E, B, G, C. Well, just looking at it, I know that's not a triad. Could E be the root? E, G, B, D. That would be stacking thirds. Well, there's no D, there's a C, so it's not the E. E is not the root. B, D would be, B's not the root because I can't stack thirds. G, B, D, no. C, up a third to E, up a third to G, up a third to B. I can stack thirds off of the C. It would be a seventh chord. Well, C would be what in the key of G? It would be a 4 chord. And C, E, G, B is what sonority of seventh chord? It is not a major triad with a minor seventh, like the 5 chord. It is a major triad with a major seventh. So, we have to put a capital M to indicate that we have a major seventh involved with this seventh chord. It's not a dominant seventh, another way of saying a minor seventh. It is a major seventh. And it's not in root position. The E is in the bass, it is first inversion. First inversion for seventh chords are indicated by 6-5. So 4 major 6-5 is how you would analyze that chord. Alright, well then here on these eighth notes we could say, okay, well these are all non-chord tones. 3 non-chord tones at the same time. Now, we talked about that you should not write more than 1 at a time. But here we have 3 at a time. Let's analyze them as if they were non-chord tones and see what happens. If the A is a non-chord tone, it's prepared by step and then leap in the opposite direction. That would be an escape tone. So we could call this an escape tone. B, A, G is prepared by step, resolved by step. We could call that a passing tone. E, F sharp, G, prepared by step, resolved by step in the same direction, passing tone. So we could look at that and say, look, we've got all those 3 notes non-chord tones we know and understand. Now you remember I said you are not authorized to write simultaneously sounding non-chord tones. I did tell you that there's a way to do it that works, but I wasn't going to get to that yet. Let's take a look and see, what if we did not call this and of 3 non-chord tones? What if we called it a chord? What chord would it be? Let's take a close look. We would have an F sharp, A, C. F sharp, A, C. That's a triad. What triad is it? It's a 7 diminished triad. So, what do we learn here? Well, there might be 2 ways that we could analyze this spot in this piece. We could analyze it as all non-chord tones, or we could also say it's a 7 diminished triad on the and of 3. Now, that's a little unusual, right? We don't usually have diminished triads in root position because that dissonant interval of the tritone, the diminished fifth, is dissonant. So we almost always put diminished triads in first inversion. But on the other hand, this goes by so quickly. It's only an 8th note, and it's on a weak beat. It's on an upbeat. So both ways would be acceptable for analysis. And when we talk about how you write, this would be an example of how you could write simultaneous non-chord tones. How do you do it? They make up their own chord. And so then you're in the position of saying, well, do I analyze it as the chord it creates, or the non-chord tones? And both are valid. Both give you some insight into how the piece is working. So we're going to put this in parentheses here. That's the 7 diminished triad. And we're going to leave that. We know that these 3 non-chord tones could create us a root position 7 diminished triad. Going here to our next chord, we have 2 G's, a D, and a B. Well, that is a G major triad root position. We have a note in the soprano, a C, and actually I wrote a wrong note here. I apologize. That should be an A, which makes all the difference in the world in terms of analyzing what kind of non-chord tone it is. It is prepared by step and resolved by leap in the opposite direction. That is an escape tone. I have a funny little saying that might help you with remembering escape tones. Imagine you are in an apartment building, you're sleeping, and a fire starts. What do you do to escape the burning building? You step out onto the fire escape, and then you leap to safety. Step, leap, escape tone. It's silly, but you might remember. Okay. Our next chord. Pitches are C, G, E, and A. We have to determine which one, it's not a triad, maybe it's a 7th chord. Which one is the root? Which one can you stack thirds on? C, E, G, B would be the note, but that's not it. Well, A, C, E, G, we have a winner. That would be the note we can stack thirds on. A is what in the key of G? Is 2. The most common 7th chords are 5-7 and 2-7. Very uncommon to have 1 as a 7th chord. 2-7 is pretty common. 3-7 is very uncommon. So these are the most common. After that, 4, 6, very unusual. 7 is not uncommon. It's kind of down there with 4 maybe. So 7, half diminished 7. So 2, 4, 5, and 7, pretty common in terms of 7th chords. 1 sometimes. So I would say the next most thing, if we were a 3rd rank, would be 1 as a 7th chord. So 1 major 7. Then after that, 6 and 3, really uncommon to have as 7th chords. So here we're getting a 4 chord and we're getting a 2 chord. So 2, 6, 5. This F sharp is not part of that chord. I also have something I left out here. So that F sharp, prepared by step, resolved by step in the same direction. It's a passing tone. We then go to beat 2, D, F sharp, D, A. That is a D major triad. That is a 5 chord in our key. G, B, D, G. That is a 1 chord. So we have now analyzed this example and all the non-chord tones there. The next step is writing the simplified version. So what would you do? You just take out all the non-chord tones. And let's see what that would look like. I just change those note values. So here on this pickup, I just make it a quarter note G in the alto, as opposed to putting in the 8th note. And then on beat 1, I take out the suspension and I go directly to the resolution note. And I will be getting out of the way so you can see all this shortly. On the 5 chord, in the tenor, I have only the 7th of the chord. I will talk you through all of this in just 1 minute. So now you can see that first measure a little bit better. Simplified version below, taking out all those non-chord tones. Let's listen to what we have. Okay? So here is the simplified version. Simplified version first. We have So that sounds really nice. But let's see what was done in actual music to make it a complete piece. So I'm going to play this out of time, just so that we can hear all those non-chord tones and how they change the sound of the piece. So that's pretty different if we listen to it. So let's listen to that again. And let me point out a few things here. So 1, 6, passing tone with that major 7. Sounds really striking. And then, you can hear that 9 suspended. There's your resolution. That 9/8 suspension is very pretty sounding. 5/7. It's interesting that the anticipation is chosen there. The 7th stands out. A major 7th sonority is very striking, and so they bring it out even more by doing the anticipation. Very often when you're going to do something that sticks out, you don't want to make it, you want to make it obvious that you're doing something that sticks out, as opposed to having it just be some random thing that sticks out. And by making that anticipation, it draws attention, and it kind of like makes it like the composer saying, this is on purpose. It's like, pay attention to that 7th, this is something special. Now here, I wanted to point out that 4 major 6/5 to 1, it's, you know, it's in terms of our harmonic progression, that's acceptable, but it's unusual. 4, especially in an inversion, it more commonly goes to a 5 chord. 4, 5, 1 is a much more common progression than 4 in an inversion to 1. So in a certain sense, this progression here to the 7 diminished makes a lot of sense. It smooths out that progression. So I think many people would argue that this 7 is not just the incidental chord that results from these non-chord tones. It's there on purpose. It helps drive the harmonic motion from 4 to a dominant function, which 7 diminished is. And if you think about 7 diminished, let's look what's in common between 7 diminished and 5/7, right? We have, and let me use some other colors here to make it fun. The F sharps are in common. The C's are in common. And that A that was missing is now here. The only thing that's not there is the D. And you got a scale, D, E, F sharp, driving you right up. So this makes a lot of sense in terms of good construction. All right? A couple other quick things I wanted to point out to you. We've been talking almost exclusively about diatonic non-chord tones. Diatonic meaning using notes that are in the key signature, but not in the chord at that moment. You can also have chromatic non-chord tones. So you can have chromatic passing tones, chromatic appoggiaturas, all of those things are possible. So when you're analyzing music, don't be thrown off by chromatic non-chord tones. Another thing that you might see in analysis, so this is just warning, things to look for, multiple passing tones in a row. So you might have passing tone, chord tone, passing tone, passing tone, chord tone. That's something that happens. You basically are still analyzing how is it prepared, how is it resolved. It's a passing tone. If this happened to be another non-chord tone, but we went to a chord tone D here, you'd say passing tone, chord tone. You're always looking at what's before and what's after. Doesn't matter whether the note before and after are chord tones in this situation. So multiple passing tones. The appoggiatura, on rare occasion, will not have the step be in opposite direction. Appoggiaturas will always be prepared by a leap and resolved by a step, but sometimes it won't be step in the opposite direction. So you might have leap up, resolve up by step. Another possibility. And we already talked about labeling the suspensions. So this gives you a lot of excellent information on how you can analyze music and then see how these non-chord tones turn a bare bones structure into fully fledged music. Thank you very much.